Thank you for joining this EfL online workshop. Today we're going to be looking at how to create assessment frameworks and assessment books. And these are for things that aren't PLGs. So these are not for frameworks that are specific to one learner, which we call PLGs, personal learning goals. What we're looking at today is how to create assessment frameworks and assessment books with frameworks that are going to be used with more than one learner. In terms of the webinar today and the structure of it, if you can just check and remain muted during the demonstration sections of the webinar. And then if you have got any questions at all, do please make a note of it. And then at the end of the session, there will be a question and answer session. We'll invite anyone just to unmute themselves and ask any questions as we go through. Just on that, I probably won't be able to look out for the chat or any messages through that at the same time. So if you have got any questions, just make a quick note. And then during the question and answer session, I'll be very happy for you to unmute yourself and ask me away. So today's EfL online workshop, we're looking at how to create assessment frameworks and assessment books. So we're going to start off by looking at what is an assessment framework and an assessment book, and then how to actually access them. So I'll show you how you can access assessment books either at the moment on the iOS app or also using the web console, the browser version of Evidence for Learning app. In terms of assessment frameworks are heavily linked to, at times, you can use assessment frameworks to make assessment judgments against any frameworks that are in your cloud. So there is, you can create your own continuums to track progress. During this webinar, I'll direct you and signpost you to where you can find and watch that video on how to create a continuum to track progress. So you can watch that in your own time. In terms of, we will play a video though, of then how to create an assessment framework, not a PLG, and also how to create an assessment book, not a PLG. And then at the end of the session, there'll also be a question and answer session where I'll invite any questions. So I'm just going to stop sharing the screen there. And first of all, we're going to switch across to the iPad. So in terms of what is an assessment framework and an assessment book, you may have a number of curriculum frameworks that you're gathering evidence for a number of learners. You may gather evidence and record observations. Where assessment frameworks can be really useful and assessment books, there's two things really. If you do want to start making assessment judgments against some of those outcomes within the framework to track progress over time, then you can build your own continuum and add that into the assessment framework. And we'll look at how you can add the continuum into the assessment framework today. That even if you're not going to track progress against outcomes within a framework, the assessment book can be a really useful and powerful place for teachers, teaching assistants, middle leaders and SLT to review progress for a learner or for a group of learners, and particularly in respect of one framework or one area of the curriculum that they may be working on. So what we're first of all going to do is I've logged in on the iOS app. I'm then going to go and log into the assessment area, which is the pencil and pad icon at the bottom right, which is just down here. So each assessment user and assessment manager has their own unique login to be able to get into this area. Assessment users get to see the assessment books that they've got permission, specific permission to be able to access. And assessment managers have the feature that they can click show all. I'm an assessment manager in this test school, where they can then see all the assessment books in the school. The one we're going to be looking at today is this assessment book for Blue Class, for a framework around I can statements around maths. So I'm going to tap on the assessment book. And what the assessment book allows you to do is you get to see all the framework items down the left. And then for each learner within this Blue Class, they have their own summary page. And we can clearly see how much framework has been linked against each of the individual outcomes within the framework. And if we want to, what we can also then do is tap onto any of the outcomes to be able to see the evidence in more detail. So my iPad just switched. Let me put it back. So I'm just going to tap on this number 5 there. And if we scroll down, what this then will build up, I suppose, is a case study, a narrative of all the inputs that the teachers, the teaching assistants, and the multidisciplinary team have fed into this progress for this learner. And in this case, it's Kian. And the actual specific outcome we're looking at is this: I can use numbers to 3 in a familiar activities and games. This is a test score, so I've just put this evidence in, but it still gives you an idea that over time you can have a starting point, I suppose, to be able to see how a learner was performing or engaging in their learning in the data in the past, and then you can scroll through and be able to see progress over time, as well as all the inputs that the team have been able to do to help this learner to be able to progress. As I'm sure you know, you can then tap onto any of these pieces of evidence to be able to view the pictures and the videos in more detail. So let's go back to the assessment book. So the assessment book has all the framework items down the left, and it has all the evidence that's easily accessible for each of the outcomes. At any point, you can then tap on the top right to be able to either use the left or right arrow to navigate to other learners within the blue class in this case, or you can tap on the silhouette of a learner in the middle and go straight to another learner's page. So I can also see, okay, well, what's Kerry's progress like and what's been happening for Kerry in relation to maths at the moment in my school. So even if you're not going to set up, add a continuum to your assessment framework, you can have this really powerful summary page where you can see all the outcomes, you can see all the evidence, and it's really easy to see where there might be gaps in learning, and also be able to tap into the evidence to build up and to celebrate a case study of all the work that's been done with that learner and the progress that learner's made over time. As you can see though, you can also add a continuum in, and in this example, this school, my practice school, was using a continuum from emerging, developing, secure, and generalized. You can build your own continuums that fit with your language around attainment and progress. And at the same time, you can set baseline flags up. So you can record a starting point, and then over time, you can make further assessment judgments. So in this example here, you can see the learner was baselined as developing in my continuum, and now they're currently working at the latest judgment is currently secure. And if I tap on that judgment, I can see the baseline judgment, I can see when it was made, I can see who made it, and I can also see a more recent judgment that I've made today, and again, what judgment this has been at. If you want to, at the same time as making a judgment, an assessment judgment, you can add a professional statement to give a bit more detail on that judgment that you've made. Some schools use it for a bit more of a detailed explanation to why they've made this judgment. Some schools also use the professional statement area to be able to sort of plan next steps or for moderation. So I'll just go back to the assessment book. So you can baseline at the top left if a baseline flag is available, and you can make subsequent judgments by tapping on the dotted rectangle on the right hand side. And if you do want to add a professional statement in at the same time, you can tap on the paper, I suppose, on the right, and that's a space to be able to add a professional statement. So that's what an assessment book is. And to get to the stage of having an assessment book, you need to create an assessment framework that is directly linked to one of your curriculum frameworks or subject specific or area skill. But it's a framework that's been used with more than one learner. So you create the assessment framework and then you create the assessment books. The way schools manage their assessment books is different. You know, you could have a number of assessment books for each class, or you can also have a larger assessment book that has a number of classes in. It's up to you how you manage your assessment books. The important thing to remember is that when you record evidence, it's stored against the original framework. So we were stored against the original ICANN PKS statement framework. Once you make assessment judgments, that's stored against the assessment framework. And then you see the assessment judgments in the assessment book, and you make the assessment judgments in the assessment book. But they're actually stored against the assessment framework. So if, for example, Kerry moved from the blue class to a green class, I could take her out of the blue class assessment book, put straight into the green class assessment book, ICANN statements, and then it would pull through and it would see all the assessment data that was stored against the assessment framework. And it would also pull through all the evidence that was stored against the original framework that had been added to your cloud. The other really nice feature about the assessment frameworks and assessment books, it can be done retrospectively. So for example, you could already at your school be collecting evidence and storing it or linking it to a framework that's in your cloud. And then at any point, you create the assessment framework and the assessment book, and it will pull through all the evidence that has already been linked to that framework. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. So that's how you can see assessment books within the iOS app. What I'm also going to do is be able to show you where you can also see the assessment books within the web console. So just bear with me one moment. I will just get the screen up and I'll share it straight away with you. So hopefully you now can see the web console for my practice school. And what we've logged into here, the web console is the browser version of the app. It has a number of features where you can capture evidence, review evidence, you can create PLGs, those frameworks that are specific to one learner, and manage them. But it's also the place where you can access any assessment books that are in your cloud. So I'm going to click on assessment books, just going to bear with me, just appear. So from the top menu, you can click on assessment books, and in a similar way to the app, assessment users would see the assessment books they've got specific permission to be able to see, and assessment managers can click show all. You have the option of searching for PLGs, those frameworks that are specific to one learner, or the option of searching for all frameworks. So I'm going to go straight back into the same one we've just seen on the app. And in a similar way to the app, it's you can access the assessment book on a desktop computer. So I can now see all the framework items down the left. Again, I can see the evidence, and again, I can click on any of these to see a timeline of all the evidence and inputs for that learner. This is where you can also access and see the latest judgments that have been made. And it's also, again, similar to the app, you can click baseline and add baseline judgments here and make also review judgments or assessment judgments as and when you want to. So you can use the iOS app to be able to access the assessment books, or you can also use the web console to be able to access it on a desktop computer. The next thing I want to be able to look at then, in terms of where you'll be able to find more information, creating your own continuum, if you do want to add a continuum when you create your assessment framework. So I'm going to go to the Resource Center, which is just here. There's lots of guides and videos within the Resource Center. It's also where you registered for this online EfL workshop. So at the top of the search bar, I'm just putting resources.evidenceforlearning.net. So that's resources.evidenceforlearning.net, and you'll navigate to the Resource Center. There's a whole section within the Resource Center around assessment. So I'm just going to click on there in a moment. I'll click there now, actually. And then I'm going to show you where there's various guides and videos around assessment. The first one that you may be interested in, you may have already set up assessment users and managers. If not, that would give you information on how you can. This is the link that would be able to take you straight to see how to create a continuum to track progress. The step-by-step guides, detailed instructions, as well as a walkthrough video to be able to help you. Just to time today, the amount I want to get through, and also invite you for any question and answers. We won't watch that video today, but what we will look at in a moment is how to create an assessment framework and also how to create an assessment book. There is further information on here on how to access the assessment books on the web console, as well as recording professional judgments. And if you are interested in setting up baselines, so an assessment judgment as a starting point, and expected outcomes. So what those would be a particular flag to say, okay, where do I expect or hope this learner will be at a particular point in the future? And that might be at Christmas, for example, or it might be by the end of the academic year. It's completely up to you. So just as we're about to start the video, I'm just going to stop sharing that screen for a moment. And then I'm going to go into how to create an assessment framework, which is just here. And this is the video that we'll just play.
In this video, I'm going to show you how to create an assessment framework using the iOS app on an iPad. You can create an assessment framework for any subject-specific or generic frameworks that are going to be used for more than one learner. Following on from creating the assessment framework, you can then create an assessment book. So I've opened up the Evidence for Learning app on my iOS device, and in this case it's an iPad. And the first thing I'm going to do is tap on the cog at the very top left. Then I'm going to tap on Cloud Admin at the top right. You then enter in the Cloud Admin password and then tap Continue. We're then on the Cloud Admin menu, and I'm going to scroll down to the Assessment section. So within the Assessment section, there are further videos and guides available within the EfL Online Resource Centre, showing you how to create a continuum if you want to be able to track progress against a certain outcome. And you can use your own continuums, such as emerging, developing, secure, generalized, or you can use any continuum or any language that you want to at your school. And that, to create a continuum, you first of all create the aspects and then create the schema. So there are further videos available within the EfL Online Resource Centre on how to do that. And again, you can also create an assessment framework and not add an assessment schema at this stage. We've already, within this test school, created aspects and a schema so we can use it when we're making the assessment framework. So I'm now going to tap on Assessment Frameworks. You can see we haven't actually created any assessment frameworks yet. So to create my first assessment framework, I'm going to tap on the plus at the very top right. An assessment framework is always linked to a curriculum framework or a subject-specific framework or a framework that you're going to be using with more than one learner. To be able to link it to that framework that's already in your cloud, then we're going to tap on where it says Frameworks None, so we can then link it directly to a framework. You can then see all the frameworks that are in your cloud that are not a PLG. What I'm then going to do is tap on the framework that I want to link this to. So in this case, it's going to be Maths I Can statement. So just tap on that name. You can then see we're taken back to the assessment framework settings page. And this is the name of the framework at the top. So it's going to be named the assessment framework. It's going to have exactly the same name as the framework that's already in the cloud. Then tap on View or Edit Assessment Items. As we're creating this assessment framework, no assessment frameworks items have currently been specified. To tell the system which items we want to be able to assess, we tap the plus at the top right. You'll then see the framework being displayed, and we can use the multi-select function and also the slider at the bottom to be able to pick the items very efficiently. So we can move the slider at the bottom to the right, and that will completely open the framework up so we can see all the framework items. We can also move it all the way to the left to completely collapse it all the way down back to mathematics. So if we back to move the slider all the way to the right again, I'm now going to switch on multi-select at the top, and then the button is turned to the right and is switched on to green. Then if I tap on mathematics at the top, you'll see that all the items within the whole framework will have been selected. And I'll just scroll down to show you that. Scroll back to the top. What we then can do is use the slider to be able to decide which items we don't want to actually assess. In this example, I actually want to be able to assess either now or in the future any of these outcomes and the specific outcomes, but I don't want to actually assess the headings within the framework. So I'm going to move the slider to the left until we get back to the level of the headings. So let's move that to the left. And you can see when we get to this stage, these are the way the framework is broken down in terms of the headings. So I'm going to leave multi-select switched on and just tap again on mathematics. And then if I move the slider at the bottom all the way again to the right, you'll see that in each item now that I want to be able to assess, and in this case it's all the actual outcomes or the I can statements, I've got a tick to the right, and the actual headings of the framework are not going to be an accessible item. And you can see that throughout the framework. So we go back down. On this particular one, actually, I also don't want to assess this Key Stage 1 greater depth, because I just want to deselect one item. I'm going to switch off multi-select and just tap on that one item so that that becomes unticked. And it is worth just having a quick look through the framework to see if there's any other items like that. And in this case, here's another heading or subheading. But you can see the other headings, the main headings of the framework, will automatically not been selected because we use the slider at the bottom to be able to move the framework, open and close it, and select the items we want to include. So now I'm going to tap Add at the top right. You can now see that all the items that we've chose to be accessible are highlighted in green, and the items that we haven't are not highlighted in green. Again, we can change this if you've made a mistake by swiping left on an item and deleting it from being an assessment item. If there was another item that you wanted to actually add on, you could press the plus at the top right to be able to make that amendment. But for now, I'm going to tap Assessment Framework top left to return to the Assessment Framework settings page. If you don't actually want to add a continuum to this assessment framework at this stage, then we could just set the assessment framework to be live, and then we could start the process of making the assessment books. But in this example, I do want to add a schema, so I'm going to tap on View or Edit Assessment Schemas. I actually want to use the same assessment schema throughout the whole framework. If I didn't, I could select individual items that I wanted to be able to add the schema to and assign it. So you can use different schemas for different areas of the framework. But in this example, I'm going to use the multi-select function at the top to switch that on. And then if I tap on anywhere in the green, you'll see that they all become highlighted orange. It is worth scrolling the way down quickly through the framework, and if any other area, such as this one, is still highlighted in green, and you want to add the assessments, the schema, same schema to this area too, you just tap on the screen. So it is just worth quickly scrolling through the bottom, checking that all the items that you want to add the same continuum or the same schema to track progress has then turned to orange. You then tap Assign at the top right. You may have already created a number of assessment schemas, and then what you do is you pick the one that you want to assign to the items within this assessment framework that you've just chosen. So I'm going to tap on this Emerging, Developing, Secure, Generalized schema that I've called EDSG. And we can now see that the schema has been added to the items, and you can see that on the right-hand side. If you haven't chosen to add a schema, then the yellow boxes will be blank, and that's also absolutely fine. I'm now going to return back to Assessment Framework settings by tapping on Assessment Framework top left. Before the end of this video, I just want to include some information for those of you who are also using Insights for Learning. As you'll see on the screen, for those of you who are using Insights for Learning, your option will, instead of just saying View or Edit Assessment Schemas, it will also say And Summary Items. So I'm going to tap on that now. So for those of you using Insights for Learning, you can add the schema to items as we have done earlier in this video, just the same. But you'll also notice that you have a blue rectangle to the right of any item that isn't an accessible item. And you can choose to make any of these items with the blue rectangle to the right summary totals. So for example, we could make mathematics a summary total, and then that whole, all the outcomes within that framework, you're then going to get a summary total to see the progress for each individual learner. So in this case, I'm going to tap on mathematics so it becomes highlighted, and then tap Assign at the top right. It then shows the items that are going to be included in this summary total, but for now I'm just going to click Save, and I can review that later. I'm then going to add the summary total for the item for number, counting and value. So I tap on it to highlight it, and again click Assign top right. And again, I press Save at the top right of the screen. Once the summary total is highlighted, you can see all the items that are going to be included in that summary total are indicated with a blue dot. So I can scroll down within the number, counting and value, and all these outcomes will be included in the summary total. But you can see that within all the outcomes within number calculation will not be. If I scroll back to the top, I will click back on mathematics. With this summary total, I can scroll to the bottom and I can see all the outcomes within the framework have all got a blue dot to the right hand side, and that means that it'll be included in the summary total. So I've now repeated that process and added in summary totals for all the items that I want to be summary totals. So I can now tap Assessment Framework top left. The final then thing to do is just to set the assessment framework to be live. So where it says status draft, I tap on that and it will become live. And then I can return back to the Cloud Admin by tapping Assessment Frameworks, top left. We can see we've created our first assessment framework and the green circle indicates that it's live. So I just tap Cloud Admin, top left.
So I'm just also now going to play the next video, which is how to then create the assessment book that follows on. So I'm just going to go back to the Resource Center, click on Set up an assessment book, and I'm just going to play this video for us now.
In this video, I'm going to show you how to create an assessment book using the iOS app on an iPad. This video follows on from how to create an assessment framework using the iOS app on an iPad. So I've opened up the Evidence for Learning app on my iOS device, and in this case an iPad. And the first thing that I'm going to do is then tap on the cog at the top left. I'm then going to tap on Cloud Admin at the top right. You then enter in the Cloud Admin password and then tap Continue. So I'm then on the Cloud Admin menu, and if we scroll down, we can get to the Assessment section within the Cloud Admin menu. On a previous video and another video available within the EfL Online Resource Center shows you how to make a continuum by first of all creating an aspect and then a schema. And there was also a video showing you how to create an assessment framework. This video is going to show you then how to create an assessment book linked to one of those assessment frameworks. So the first thing we're going to tap on is assessment books. This is the first assessment book that I'm going to create. So I'm going to press the plus at the top right to create a new one. So we're then on the assessment book settings page. The first thing we're going to do is to name the assessment book. So I just tap where it says new assessment book. And then where it says new assessment book, we can just delete that. And then you can just type in the name that you want the assessment book to be. In this case, I'm just going to paste it in to save time. But you can see I've named the assessment book. I've called it Blue Class because that's the class of the learners that are going to be within this assessment book. And it's linked to the ICANN statements, the PKS framework. So I've included the name of the group of the learners and the name of the framework. It's up to you how you want to order it at your school. I'm then going to tap Save at the top right. And the next thing I'm going to do is then tap on Set Learners for this assessment book. And then to select learners, I'm going to press the plus at the top right. I could then tap on all learners to select individual learners if that was appropriate for this assessment book. But in this case, this is for the whole of the Blue class. So I tap on Blue class. And to select all the learners in the Blue class, I can just use the multi-select box towards the top right. Once you tap on that, a tick will appear against all the learners within the group. And then to confirm that you want to select all the learners, you just tap Done at the top right. I then tap Assessment Book at the top left to return back to the Assessment Book settings page. I'm then going to tap on Set Permissions for this assessment book. So then you can see a list of all the assessment users and assessment managers that have been set up. If I use an assessment manager, that will be displayed under the name, as in this case for myself, Blake Perry, and therefore assessment managers don't need to be given permission to access a specific assessment book because the assessment managers automatically have permission to access all assessment books. So you can see Bob, Nicola and Jane are all assessment users, and therefore if any of them need to have access to the assessment book, then they need to be set. So in this case, I'm going to tap on Bob and on Jane's name. A tick appears on the right hand side to indicate they've been selected, and then I tap Done at the top right. If at any point you realise you've made a mistake, say I want to remove Bob's access, I could always swipe left on his name and then tap Delete on the right hand side. If I wanted to add other members of staff to give them access, I again could press the plus at the top right to repeat the process. But for now, I'm now going to tap an assessment book at the top left. And we're again back on the assessment book settings page. And then we're going to tap on Set Assessment Items for this assessment book, which is at the very bottom. In this school, I've only got one assessment framework. You may have more assessment frameworks by this time, so it is worth taking the time to make sure that you're linking the assessment book with the assessment framework that you want to. So I'm going to tap on the assessment framework that I want to link this assessment book to. Depending on the structure of the assessment framework, you may just want to select certain items to include, and then you just tap on the items that you wanted to include in the assessment book, and you can tap Save at the top right. In this example, I actually want to include all the outcomes within the assessment book. So I'm going to switch on multi-select towards the top left. So just tap on the button. Once it's on, it's switched to the right and turns green. And I just tap anywhere on the screen, and then all the items that are selected will go orange. And it is worth just scrolling down through the framework just to make sure that all the items that you did want to include have all turned orange. As you can see, these items are still green, and I do want to include them in the assessment book. So I just tap on the item again, or one of the items again, and all those items within that area will turn orange. So once you've gone to the bottom of the framework and you've checked that all the items that you want to now include in this assessment book have become orange, you then tap Save at the top right. You'll then be brought back to the assessment book settings page, and we've now named the assessment book. We've added the learners into this specific assessment book. We've set the permissions in terms of which assessment users can access the assessment book, and we've selected the items to include in the assessment book. So the final thing then to do is to set it live. So you tap where it says Status Draft. And as you can see, the status is now live, and that's also indicated with a green circle to the left. So we can now tap on Assessment Book's top left. So I've now made that assessment book for the blue class. I could repeat the process and create another assessment book for another class by tapping on the plus at the top right, or I can tap on Cloud Admin top left to return back to the Cloud Admin menu.
So hopefully that gives you a good idea of how you'll be able to create an assessment framework, an assessment book at your school. The great thing about being able to watch the videos is you'll be able to watch them again as you actually start to try and create one. What I will just do is go back to the iPad again. So my iPad screen should just be coming up back on yours. So that assessment framework and assessment book that I created in that video, I've then since gone into that assessment book down at the bottom right. Just let those catch up. Just pop in my username and password again. And as we saw at the start, what I've then since done is then gone into that assessment book, and I've made baseline judgments. I've made further assessment judgments as well. Part of that video also just mentioned insights for learning and using summary totals. So if you are a school who is all using insights for learning, this is then showing you where the summary totals are. So I'll just put my torch on so you can see. So these are the summary totals that you saw within the setup video. You can see it's been shown as the percentage. So the percentage of the outcomes that have been achieved within number, or the percentage of the outcomes that have been achieved across the whole of the maths framework. That number and score is built up based on the continuum that you set up and the values that you give your values in your continuum. You can tap on the percentage and it will give it you as a value. And if you tap again, it will give it you as a fraction, I suppose. So it shows you out of 132. And what that would be is the highest score possible in my particular continuum was 4. And all the outcomes in the number section add up to the possible score of 132. And the whole framework adds up to 144. But hopefully that gives you a good idea of the use of assessment books. And again, just to make clear that, if you aren't using assessment books for assessment books can be still a really powerful place for teachers and for SLT to be able to plan teaching, review what's been going on, and to celebrate learners' progress over time. So I'll just stop sharing there. Try and get that back up again. There we go. And I suppose now this is the section of the webinar, the EfL online workshop, where I'm very happy for any of you just to unmute yourselves and ask any questions, and I'll try and answer them best I can. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask me at this stage? Well, as you know, you can always get in touch with us. You can always email us at services@theteachercloud.net. So that's services@theteachercloud.net. Just come back out of there. Come back out for a second. Let's see, there we go. I'm trying to go back to the resource center. So what I just want to do at the end is just go back to the resource center. So I'm going to go back to the start of it here. You registered for this event in this section on the upcoming online events and workshops. And if I just go back there again, it's a useful area to come back to and review over the coming days and weeks. First of all, you'll see that other workshops that have taken place, recordings of the event have already been added on there. So there's a number of other workshops that have taken place over recent weeks. By all means, come back here. You'll be able to click on any of these recordings to access the videos. Be very willing and very happy for you to share the recordings with any of your colleagues in any shape, way or form that you feel would be useful for you and for them and for your school. Do also come back to this area though, because further EfL online workshops in terms of focuses and also future dates will be added in due time. So do come back to this area. And I suppose the final thing for me just to say is just thank you very much for joining this EfL online workshop. And as ever, always feel free to get in touch if you've got any questions at all. Thank you very much, everyone.